we're here to find out, Matt, about the People's Plan for Nature that was devised by the, now this is where I get it wrong, the RSPE, the World Wildlife Fund, and the National Trust. And they've worked together. They've gone out last summer. They went out to talk to people across the land. So that's England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and that's it, isn't it? That's four. To talk to people out on the streets about nature and what nature means to them, and to find out if people care about nature or not. And they found over 80% said they did, that nature was important to them. And then out of all those people they surveyed, they then found 100 people from all different walks of life, ages, ethnicities, socioeconomic backgrounds, education, who would come together for 4 weekends to be part of a citizens' assembly, to be the voice for nature, because they felt that nature was not getting to speak. And we were doing lots of things, particularly post-Brexit, where we're trying to get rid of protections. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about wanting growth and being able to focus on the economy, that some of the protections that were there seem to be at threat, really, and that nature will be even less cared for than it has been. And it's really building on the Dasgupta review. So Professor Partha Dasgupta's work on the economics of biodiversity loss. So it's come out of that. And it's in recognition that climate change and global heating is a massive issue. And we also need to raise the profile of biodiversity loss, which is going to have a huge impact on people, as well as really destroying the ecology in places all around the world. So they're talking about wanting to care for the planet, but very much wanting to care for people as well. So this, the People's Plan was put together as this idea that you'd have the Citizens' Assembly, they'd have these 4 weekends, have very specific things that they're doing in those weekends, and they'll be guided by facilitators from an independent organisation. And that out of that will come a plan that will be given to the government and to policymakers and businesses, and they'll make a big noise with it, so that across the country, people are really being asked to think about nature and put nature into their decision making. I can't remember, there's a country in the world that's actually made nature part of their politics. Can you remember? Have you heard of it?
I haven't, but I would assume it's going to be somewhere like Finland or Denmark or Sweden.
Well, it's somewhere like Costa Rica or
really, that's amazing.
Colombia. It's not Colombia, it probably isn't Colombia, is it? But it's a country, it's a hot country, but they've actually said that the land and the creatures and the plants and the animals, they all have got to have a voice when in all political decision making, which I think is quite fascinating. But certainly it's people here in the UK saying that's what we need here. Nature needs to have a voice. So that's what the People's Plan is about. And at the moment, people have gone into breakout rooms. We've asked them to think about what challenges are facing schools and those of us wanting to get children out to nature. What challenges are we facing right now? Just to sort of get some of that conversation going, because we know it's really hard. I mean, you yourself have been noting how tough it is in schools at the moment. There's such a lot going on.
Yeah, it's a busy time.
So there's a lot to do, isn't there?
Yeah.
And Ofsted aren't giving people an easy ride.
No, they're not, and I think that's partly in their lack of understanding about the benefits of outdoor learning and forest school in particular, in terms of the learning that comes out of it. It's not as valued.
Yeah, and that is something that we as the FSA are talking about. How do we support Ofsted to understand why forest school is valuable, and how to ensure that if you're a school that has Ofsted coming and you run forest school, how to get forest school in front of them.
Yeah,
because we do get to read some amazing Ofsted reports where the value of it is recognized. Yeah. So those of you who are just heading back into the main room, would you please pop into the chat box something that you've talked about. So one of the challenges, if you could put that in the chat box so we can share some of those with each other. Oh, I'm pleased to see you, Douglas. I lost your card. I was rubbish after the conference. We must make sure we get your email address at the end. Don't run away. Oh, some people are putting things into the chat box now. So what are those challenges that you talked about? Joanne, that's interesting that you've written parent, but I wonder if you could just give us a little bit more information in there. Oh, and Chloe agrees with you.
I can't even see the Wi-Fi chat room.
Yeah, these all are huge, aren't they? Yes, I'm reading in there that, you know, it's not having the right clothes, not having enough time, big focus on the curriculum. That's huge. Yeah, and where do you go? Where do you take them? Sometimes that's tricky as well. Not enough time to explore and actually focus on needs. Yes, thank you, Olivia. That's really helpful to that comment that you and Douglas had the conversation about bigger organizations taking up the space and not allowing independent people to use it. That's quite challenging, isn't it? Finding places that we can actually go and have access to the woodlands or access to a more natural space. Well, some of these issues around justice and fairness have come up, and there has been a thread that has gone through the People's Assembly. So what I'd like to do, if you're happy, is go through just some of those questions and thoughts that have been happening. There is a website. We're going to make sure that you get the link to it. And there's going to be more exciting things coming out of this as well. So we'll make sure you have the link to the website. But the very first weekend, when these 100 people who'd never met each other, and they did come from the very top of Scotland, over in Ireland, down in the West Country. So people all came together, and I believe they came to Birmingham. I don't think I'm telling you a fib there. They went to Birmingham and they got together, and they were facilitated by this external organization who are great at facilitating discussion. And they've had scientists, they've had ecologists, economists, they've had business people. They had, I believe Tony Juniper was at the first one. I could be telling you a fib. I've got this all written down somewhere, but they've had lots of different people have come to talk to them. And they've had workshops of like 40, 45 minutes. They've had talks, and they've had opportunities to ask questions of these experts. And many of these people who are there in the Citizens' Assembly are not people who know much about nature. Some of them might do, but many of them don't. And it's not all, so it's not a room full of people. Like if you've got a whole room of Forest School people together, there'd be a lot of assumptions we'd make about what we know and what we care about. So this is a really interesting experiment as well as a project. So this first weekend that they had, the question they had was, what is nature and why do we need to protect it? So what is nature and why do we need to protect it? And they thought about fairness and equity. That was a really important part of the conversation. They talked about the nature crisis and that it was solvable. And they also talked about who is responsible. So who actually makes a difference to whether we care for our planet, but whether we care for the nature in the UK. And so they came up with, actually, it's people who own the land, it's people who work the land, but it's largely to do with planning and the politics of planning and big business. There was a lot of that understanding what has happened with big business and how has making money become more important than caring about nature and caring about the health and well-being of people. So that's the conversation they've been having. Now, we thought that might be a good one to go back into a breakout room and have that conversation again. We're going to go for a slightly bigger breakout room this time. And the question you've got is, what is nature and why do we need to protect it? Now, that might seem like a very obvious question to ask forest school people. But part of what we're doing here is inviting you to then go and have this conversation with your groups that you work with, your children, your young people, the adults, the families you work with. So what is nature and why do we need to protect it? We're going to give you a little bit longer. I'm going to give you 10 minutes this time for this conversation. And you're going to come back and one person from your group is going to share some of your thoughts. So you need to, in your group, before you come back, decide who is going to do that sharing. Well, as you're returning, the person you hopefully have got your person who's going to give us a little bit of feedback. Now, Matt, I don't know how you've got your screen set up. Are you able to see people?
I can. And if you put at the bottom of your screen where the little bar is, there is a little button that says reactions. Reactions, and if you click on the reactions button, then you can put your hand up and then you pop to the top of my screen. So I can't quite see everyone. Ah, Jenny.
Oh, was I the first one there to put my hand up? Yeah.
Yep.
Jenny?
Yeah, so I can't actually see the two ladies on my screen who I was chatting with, so apologies for that. But anyway, we were having a nice discussion, answering the question, what is nature and why do we need to protect it? Well, because basically we are nature. It is us and we are it, but we've forgotten about that. So we, in our modern day society, we feel as though we're separate from nature, but actually, if you think about it, we evolved within and among all the animals and plants that we're busy destroying. And the reason that we need to protect nature is because we won't exist if we don't. We're just signing our own extinction if we don't actually do something to protect the natural world around us. And it is quite urgent that we try and reconnect humans with the natural world, and that doesn't mean just whizzing about having adventures in nature, rushing around on bicycles or zip wires or whizzing about on speedboats. That's not what it's all about. We need to just be sitting looking at flowers and understanding the natural world and the bees that come and visit the flowers and the trees that give us all the oxygen and manage our weather. And there's so much that we've lost the understanding. And I was saying I've been looking at some work from University of Derby and the lost connection between humans and nature. And it's quite shocking, really, because there's been a steady decline, but it seems to have got much worse and accelerated since the start of the 1980s. And I feel quite guilty for my generation, because back in the 70s, it was all about flower power, and I was there and I've stayed connected with nature. But somehow, when me and my generation went off and got busy working, we must have taken our eye off the ball a bit. And so the subsequent generations have just meandered off by themselves and lost the connection with the natural world that I felt as a child and still do, haven't lost. And there was an interesting graph in stuff from Derby University that showed the use of in language, in written books and poems and songs and music, the use of nature related words like flowers and trees, nature itself, or the use of words relating to the self. It's a really amazing graph. It shows it very very well that the use of the nature language has just dropped off since the 80s, and it's really low compared to what it was. a couple of hundred years ago. But the use of me, it's all about me, it didn't exist until the 1980s, and suddenly it's just a vertical line almost going straight up to the top. And so we've just got too interested in ourselves and money. It's not our own fault, of course. There's a lot of manipulation out there in the media and society and marketing, and the big producers of our food and whatever else junk they try and sell us.
Thanks, Jenny. That's a lot to think about. Your group must have had a great conversation. Thank you so much. Olivia, are you happy to share? Thank you.
Hello. I was with Annabelle and Kyle, and we were talking, following on from what Jenny said about how nature is living beings, and we're part of that. And it can be natural, and we were also thinking it can be human made as well, because you can plant things that can help grow and provide nature and provide environment for bees, for insects. So you can create those bug hotels, you can create it as well. And when Kyle said something really good about how you should build upon what you have to enrich it and nourish it further, because as Annabelle was saying, that we are nature, and similar to what Jenny was saying, you follow it on, it's like a cycle. And we look up, if nature looks after us, we should look after it, in terms of the why should we protect it. And then we kind of went on the forest school, we kept on carry on talking, and we kind of veered off, and then we were talking about being outside, especially during COVID. Some people learn how valuable outdoors and nature is to themselves, to their mental health, to their well-being. And we were thinking that it shows great growth and freedom for people and children to be within nature, so that if it's internal and that they don't have to justify it, then do we actually need to answer the why do we need to protect it if it is technically internal, and you're thinking about the intrinsic motivation of some people going in? Because I know that I'll just put on my podcast and go out for a walk, or I'll go out for a walk and listen out to the birds and test my tree knowledge of, oh, that's an oak tree, da 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 da, kind of thing. So it's trying to make sure that people understand it's there, and that it's a place to help, and they don't have to justify going out for a walk, they don't have to justify to want to go out in the cold and the snow, kind of thing, and to help everyone and help everything. We'll see.
Thanks, Olivia. Yeah, lots to think about there. That's interesting, isn't it, that I know people who won't go out for a walk if their dog isn't there because they haven't got the dog to take. Yeah, it's interesting. Now, who else have we got? Joanna, that would be lovely. Yes, please.
I will unmute, but I do apologise if there's snoring in the background. I'm joined by a couple of dogs. We were talking about there's kind of two aspects of why we should look after nature. One is very human-centric and one is very nature-centric. And in our society, we often have to explain why we need to look after nature in terms of humans. And we can explain that in terms of finances. So, for example, in 2018, there was a paper that came out and it found that there was a fourfold increase in mental health problems, and that mental health was probably the most costly thing for our society. So the World Health Organization found that 75% of people with mental health problems are not being treated in any way. This is worldwide. It's slightly lower, it's about 60% for developed countries, but still very high. And one of the most effective ways is with nature, and it's very, very cost effective. So therefore, we can actually argue that if we are protecting nature, we are protecting humanity, and we are protecting the finances. And that's an awful thing to say, because we ought to be saying, well, nature has a right in and of itself to protection, but our society is so skewed and so insane. But when we look at our development, so you look at some of Pat Shipman's work, who's an archaeologist, and she's looking at the concepts of how humans developed and the fact that our writing came from depicting nature, our tool use came from using nature. We are formed by nature, and therefore we have to have that. So there's huge amounts of that, and it's kind of, as I say, it's just that balance and how we explain it to people. One way, nature should have right and should have a stake and should have be in and of itself something that we look at, but it's not. And we have to explain to our society, here's why it's good for us. So it's good for our mental health, it's good for our finances, it's good for society as a whole. I mean, I'm writing a thing all about eco-anxiety at the moment, so doing a paper on that, and it's kind of looking at all the different aspects. So I will stop talking now.
Thank you very much. Will you share that with us when you've done it? Do we get to
The eco-anxiety one is actually
Yeah.
for the university, so it will be published somewhere, and I probably won't be able to share it until it's formally published.
when it is formally published, will you please tell us and share it with us so it can go out into the bulletin?
I can do, although it's more aimed, because the specific thing there is actually looking at university students who are studying ecology and how eco-anxiety is actually addressing their studies.
That sounds, that I think there would be many people who read the bulletin, Joanna, who'd be love to read that. So do think of us when it's published. Thank you. Paula, your hand is
Yes, I'm coming. Bear with me. My technology is a bit slow. We got off on a tangent really about just talking about what is nature, and what the assumptions are that it's the countryside. It's a mile away. For people who live in a city, it's not your garden or your allotment or even the the little potted flowers you have on your front doorstep. It could be a lot of things. And it can mean a lot of different things to lots of different people, and that's about as far as we got, really. We didn't get very far further than that.
Well, important conversation to have. And
Yeah.
I thank you so much. Is there another group? Are we missing anyone who wants to share and hasn't yet?
Vary's nominated me. I've gone off.
Great. I was hoping that you were
Little
nominated.
while.
I'm hoping you'll do something about ancestors, John.
Ancestors. God, well, I could stray into all sorts of stuff. I'll stick with what we discussed. We basically, I mean, agree with what we said for nature. But something about it.
Your voice is disappearing. Can you get closer to the computer?
How's that?
Lovely.
God, I feel really big now. Yeah. We started off just saying that we are nature, and actually without nature, life wouldn't be here. In fact, nature is everything, even our buildings. We've got into nature names at Forest School, and how kids sometimes they just come up with a name where you think it's not nature, but then when you trace it back, actually, you said something like Charlotte chocolate. Chocolate is nature. You go right back to that. So there's something about that deeper connection with the processes and everything that we have missed. And just going back to what Joanna was saying and some of the Derby University research, and lots of research on what happened in the politics of the 80s and where we're from more self-centered, and how we've just forgotten those fundamental connections, that we are part and parcel of the natural world, and without those processes working, then like the air cycle, the water cycle, the soil cycle, and the fact that biodiversity actually maintains all of those basic elemental cycles. With just those basics, I don't think are really fought for on the school curriculum. So there was all that, and why do we need to protect it? Well, we just started to touch the surface there in terms of this is the selfish reason, because without it we wouldn't exist. But without it, biodiversity decreases, the systems then start breaking down, and we're seeing that happening everywhere. Okay, and then we got on to, well, actually, if we are gonna survive, then we need to fundamentally look at what we need to do. And it is going back to that basic nature connection and that celebration of just being in contact with it. And we did get onto a little bit about COVID and how everything became quite hopeful, and the fact that people suddenly started actually just really tuning in on the value of being out there. But then it's going back to all those issues we started off with our first question. Well, where's the quality access? And is it the same for everybody? And those things about equity, and what can we do? We could all, if we all just stopped eating meat, then that would probably be one of the biggest actions the whole planet could do. But that's somewhat detached. So we ended up just talking about the small things, like going out and refilling the bird feeders this time of year, just to connect with bird, and to reinvigorate that language. So I'm glad that that was brought up, about just how, from Joanna, our language has diminished big time. So that's another reason why we need to reconnect with it, is that this whole language that is part and parcel of us. And almost the People's Plan for Nature is a dichotomy, because as soon as we say nature, it's out there, it's back to that countryside thing. We are objectifying it. So this is me coming in with my view on, if you look at indigenous and going back to the Celtic, there was no such word as nature. Absolutely, because we are part and parcel of it. Why have a word for it when we're part and parcel of it? So I think language has done a lot to actually distance our relationship, just by naming it nature and saying it and objectifying it is making it separate. So we need to move from that. I think there's a big language revolution needed. Yeah. Thank
you very much. Well, thank you for bringing all of your thoughts from your groups. I think if you, what we're going to do is share with you the links to the website and the People's Plan for Nature website. For the assembly part, you can actually hear all of the talks that have been given at each of the weekends, and you can see the questions that have been asked. You can see that actually a lot of what you've raised through this conversation has been the subject of talks and workshops, particularly looking at what is it we've lost through losing connection to the land, and that actually Indigenous peoples who treat the land well are being forced off the land by people who want to exploit it. So actually the people who know how to look after it and care for it and have done it throughout eons of history are actually even now are having to fight for their rights to stay living on and caring for the land in the way that they have done throughout their lives. So really interesting that you raised that one, John. We've got 3 minutes, so I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of what they're saying and what they're doing and where they're going to go. And I want to make sure that those of you who are finishing dead on 9, we might go a few minutes past 9, but if you need to go at 9, you'll be able to. What is happening in terms of education? Because although I said at the beginning this was for 16 plus, these organisations have got some very exciting plans for education as well. So weekend 2 was around protection and restoration, and that comes through from some of what you've been talking about. How restoring projects, restoration projects across the world have been super successful. That what's it called? The Prince William's, I want to say Golden Shot, it's not Golden Shot, but something like that. You know the thing I mean, don't you? That prize has really highlighted amazing projects that are happening around the world. So there's real hope, and that protection and restoration weekend, thank you very much, Jenny, Earthshot, brilliant. The people who are doing exciting things around the UK, but also in other countries, have actually brought their projects. And a lot of discussion in that second weekend was about who is responsible and what are we going to do if those EU protections are removed? How do we get protections in place to make sure that we're not only protecting, but we then start to restore nature. A lot of conversation about access to nature for everyone, to natural spaces. And the third weekend literally happened this weekend just gone. So there's nothing up on the website yet, but it's going to be there very soon for anyone who wants to go and explore it. But that was about sustaining people and nature. So looking at the partnership, the relationship, how do they build that to be healthy? Looking particularly at what is our model for agriculture, and for how do we treat fresh water and the sea, and how do we care for the soil? And something really interesting they noted when I was listening to the SEAM webinar on the People's Plan for Nature, they were talking about nobody had really thought that up in Scotland, people's relationship with the sea would be different to the rest of the UK, but it really is. And they were quite fascinated by that. And there were some exciting things happening up in Scotland to actually look after and care for the oceans and have sustainable fishing. And how do we change the rules and the policies around how we fish? A lot about caring for the soil. And these are all things that we can be talking about with our children, with our groups, with our adults as well. So if we're running forest school training, how does some of this feed into our sustainability policies and into how we manage our woodlands? So then weekend 4 is going to happen towards the sort of the start of spring, and that's vision and building the plan in person. And that is going to then all be thought about and talked about. And my understanding is it's actually going to get published towards the end of March, that there will be this plan, and the idea will be a big social media presence, and the plan will be presented, and they want this to be very, very exciting, to get the whole country talking about it. And that is linked to a new series that will be on television on the BBC that the RSPB and the WWF and the National Trust have worked on with the BBC and David Attenborough, and it's going to be all about the UK. It's called Wild Isles, and they're going to look at what has happened to biodiversity in our land, in our seas, and that is going to then be followed on by project work that is going to happen and is being offered to schools. And they're really pushing for, and this is World Wildlife Fund, have come up with a plan to have schools for nature in June, that it'll be a month that they want to happen every year. It's not owned by them, they're opening it up, and it's shared by anyone who wants to get involved. To tie in with 30 Days Wild, so the Wildlife Trusts are excited. The Great Big Green Week, that's in June as well. And the people that we're talking to at the World Wildlife Fund and at the RSPB, they are very supportive of the Nature Premium campaign. So everyone's talking to everyone else, and we wanted to make sure that you know that as the FSA and we're part of the Forest Education Network, that we're all in there having these conversations. And the end of our conversation now is, I just wanted to tip you off where we've got to with the Nature Premium campaign. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's a request to the government that they will make sure that every child from 3 to 18 has regular nature-based learning. So they're learning in nature, about nature, from nature, through nature, and in nature. And that will be funded. And we are seeking funding that will be green investment. So we're not asking it to come out of the DFE budget. We're looking for green investment, so businesses will be investing in the legacy of the future. And that's very much what the Schools for Nature and the People's Plan for Nature is all about. It's about building legacy and investment. So it comes back to that being a good ancestor. So I personally feel super hopeful. The news at the moment is a bit dire, isn't it? I really do recommend going onto the People's Plan for Nature website and looking for some of those talks. They're really informative, and there's a wide range. I love, Jenny, that you mentioned Miles Richardson. He gives a talk. He's somebody who gives a talk, and you'll recognize names on there. And what I loved was looking on there and seeing lots of the people who've been super helpful and encouraging around the Nature Premium campaign. Just to tell you as well, if you haven't read the bulletin, the FSA started the Nature Premium campaign, and it grew bigger and bigger and bigger, and has now become an entity of its own. So it doesn't sit within the FSA. The FSA now sits on the steering group. There's a steering group that's different NGOs, and the FSA is one of them. And we're sitting under the umbrella of the Institute for Outdoor Learning, and they've given us a specialist sector group designation, which means that they look after us. They'll look after funds, and they'll look after governance and things like that. And we can all get on with the business of actually finding the funding and making the Nature Premium happen. So I think, Matt, we were going to stop at 9, weren't we? We were going to invite people to look after their bodies as they're part of nature, rather than keeping going till 9:30. But I think we could stay on for anyone who has a particular question, but I'm going to suggest that we actually finish here. We say thank you to everyone. We ask you just to pop a word into the chat box that says how you're feeling about your role as a forest school practitioner, forest school leader, and how what might you go away and do from this to actually make a difference and have this conversation with your client group. So if you can pop something in the chat box and wave, we'll say thank you so much for joining us.
Hopefully see you at the next one.
And we'd love to see you at the next one.
Which is all about nature connection. So that, you know,
Yeah,
leads on
and
very
that
nicely.
will be very good. It'll be a really good evening.